Pressure mounts on Ukraine after Trump-Zelensky war of words. After the war of words between President Trump and Zelensky, Ukraine may lose all support from the US, leaving them facing greater pressure from Russia. Talks to end the conflict between Russia and Ukraine took an unexpected turn on February 28, when a meeting between US President Donald Trump and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky at the White House broke down in bitterness and anger. At the meeting, President Trump said his Ukrainian counterpart had to compromise in the ceasefire agreement with Russia. However, the Ukrainian leader denied it, asserting that there was no such thing as concessions. The exchange then became tense. The two leaders began to raise their voices and turned into arguments. President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance criticized President Zelensky for being ungrateful and disrespectful to the United States, while the Ukrainian leader said that the Trump administration was being too soft on Russia. The meeting ended with Zelensky leaving the White House earlier than expected and the two sides cancelling a joint press conference without signing a mineral agreement. Speaking to reporters, President Trump said the Ukrainian leader had missed his chance to end the conflict. "I want a ceasefire right now. And he wants to keep fighting. Fighting. The White House owner said. After this shocking development, the world is now wondering where the negotiations will go and whether the US and Ukrainian leaders can mend the relationship so that Washington can continue to play the role of peace broker. Some believe Europe may need to act more aggressively to end the hostilities between the two countries, while others believe President Zelensky must find a way to control the damage or even resign if he wants the US to continue supporting Ukraine. It's very difficult to predict what will happen next," said a European official who spoke on condition of anonymity. The images from the meeting were horrific. This is another sign that Europe needs to step up and support Ukraine. Mobilize Russian assets that are frozen overseas. Buy weapons for Ukraine. Increase defense spending this year. Move toward EU membership. There are still things Europe can do to help Ukraine build negotiating leverage. President Trump said he did not believe President Zelensky was ready for the United States to engage in the peace process. And Republicans who had supported Kiev's confrontation with Moscow were starting to show they had lost patience with the Ukrainian leader. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who has been a staunch supporter of Ukraine's war effort, said after the meeting that Kiev may need to find a new leader who can work with President Trump. "Here's the question for me. For the Ukrainian people, I don't know if President Zelensky can get you where you want to go with the United States. Either he has to change a lot or you have to find someone new," Graham said. Joel Rubin, a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State under Barack Obama, said Europe needs an emergency meeting to figure out how to resolve the issue. "Something needs to be done to appease President Zelensky and the United States right now." He stressed that Oval Office meeting is either a disaster for Zelensky's political career or a disaster for Ukraine. Said former Republican Congressman Mike Garcia, "President Zelensky doesn't seem to understand that he's not going to get everything he wants." A senior Western diplomat noted that US and European officials had been working together for weeks to try to avoid an outcome like this. Given Trump's sensitivity and deep skepticism of Zelensky, "I just don't understand how Zelensky got himself into this situation," the diplomat said. "Your life is literally at the mercy of that man. If he wants to throw a cake at you, let him." Russia scholars and analysts also expressed shock and concern for Ukraine's future. If President Zelensky is thinking strategically, he will accept that he cannot solve the problem on his own and instead appoint an envoy who is respected in Washington but not part of his current senior team to try to get things back on track in the coming weeks, said Eric Ciaramella, a Russia and Eurasia expert at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in Washington. The White House meeting, observers say, has put enormous pressure on Ukraine. It shows that President Trump is willing to withdraw support for Kiev. President Zelensky leaves the United States with little more than a damaged relationship with the most powerful man in America. Trump's critics will see the performance as the clearest demonstration yet of how sympathetic he is to his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin and Russia's intentions for Ukrainian territory. "I fear that the scenario of Moscow and Washington reaching a deal behind Kiev's back is becoming increasingly clear," said Ciaramella of the Carnegie Endowment. Without making enough concessions to appease Trump, Zelensky and his country will now find it difficult to rely on Washington for security guarantees, said ABC News commentator Carrington Clark. After being asked to leave the White House, Zelensky can now only hope for a warmer welcome in Europe. Clark wrote, "His country's future depends on it." Zelensky will take some solace in the fact that many European leaders have expressed solidarity in his support. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk wrote on X, to Volodymyr Zelensky and his Ukrainian friends. You are not alone. French President Emmanuel Macron stressed that Russia was the aggressor in the conflict. He added that the US, Europe, Japan and Canada were right to support Ukraine and impose sanctions on Russia, and that they would continue to do so. Moldovan President Maia Sandu, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez and Czech President Petr Pavel also stressed that they would continue to stand by Ukraine. But according to Dr. Samuel Ramani of the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, as the gap between the US and Europe widens, Ukraine's future is looking bleaker than ever. If the rift between Kiev and Washington is not quickly mended, US military aid to Ukraine could soon stop. In early February, arms shipments to Ukraine approved by President Joe Biden were cut short in a matter of days, causing panic in both Ukraine and Europe. While it still has enough weapons to fight until the summer, the loss of US support could force Ukraine to withdraw from positions it controls in Russia's Kursk region to focus on defending its territory, thereby losing leverage in potential peace talks. Ramani noted, "Now is the time to really look at what Europe can offer," noted Rachel Rizzo, a fellow at the Atlantic Council's Europe Center. Can they step up in a meaningful way, provide Ukraine with the long-term security guarantees it desperately needs, and potentially put troops on the ground to help secure a lasting peace for Ukraine? Or will Brussels' bureaucracy and differences in views among member states undermine their ability to play the leadership role they should play? Rizzo asked. After the heated argument, President Zelensky said in a separate interview with Fox News that he would not apologize to his US counterpart. "I think we have to be very open and honest. I don't think we did anything bad," he said. According to Leslie Shedd, a former senior advisor to US members of Congress, the Ukrainian leader's refusal to apologize to President Trump was an unwise move that makes restoring the relationship much more difficult. She added that the Ukrainian president should still try to revive the mineral deal, in part because it continues to encourage the US to support Ukraine, because the US cannot access the mineral resources until Ukraine has excited the conflict and avoided the risk of another confrontation with Russia. According to AFP, CNN, European leaders meet to find ways to increase support for Ukraine. European leaders meet in London to find ways to increase security cooperation and support for Ukraine, after the country disagreed with the US. Leaders of France, Germany, Denmark, Italy, Turkey, along with representatives of NATO and the European Union, EU, will attend a summit in London, England, on March 2 to discuss ways to increase support for Ukraine. Now is the time for us to unite to ensure the best outcome for Ukraine, to protect European security and also to ensure our common future, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said about the conference. Downing Street said the London summit will have 3 goals, including meeting Ukraine's short-term needs, securing a lasting agreement to end the conflict, and outlining plans for strong security measures. The London summit comes after President Volodymyr Zelensky traded barbs with US President Donald Trump at a White House meeting on February 28. The row has left US-Ukraine relations on the brink of collapse, casting doubt on Washington's future support for Kiev. After leaving the US without signing a mineral deal, Mr. Zelensky is visiting London, UK, and will attend the summit. European allies have vowed to stand by Ukraine as it and the US failed to find common ground on how to resolve the more than 3-year conflict between Kiev and Moscow. In contrast to the tense atmosphere in Washington, the Ukrainian president was warmly welcomed in London. He is also expected to meet King Charles. The two sides have signed an agreement on a $2.8 billion loan, which will be disbursed to Ukraine next week. The UK will use profits from about $300 billion of Russian assets frozen in Europe to pay off the debt. President Zelensky announced that the money would be used to produce weapons in Ukraine. He thanked the British people and government for their tremendous support from the very beginning of the conflict. After Mr. Trump took office, relations between the US and Ukraine as well as its European allies were strained. The White House owner upset Europe when he called the Russian president to discuss an agreement to end the conflict without consulting his allies or Kiev. The US president also wanted Ukraine to make concessions to reach an agreement with Russia soon, something Kiev rejected.